Hello YouTube, streaming here again, back. I thought I'd make a follow-up video about the way in which an economy works. And it's really kind of another totally different sort of big picture way to look at things, which I personally think it can clear your mind so much on, like, whenever you look at, the whole, anything regarding economics. So I'm going to start out by this very, very simple premise. What is an economy? That's the most fundamental question to start with. What is an economy? What exactly is it? Well, as it turns out, an economy is people, you and me, just everyday citizens, working in pursuit of our own self-interests to get what we need and attain a better condition in life. That's a very simple premise, but of course, things get, it can look complicated, as an economy grows, and as more people enter a workforce, as people are born, as populations increase, an economy becomes more complex, obviously, because there are more people, more transactions being made, more people serving each other. And you need to start out with that premise, that an economy is complex. Go to Tokyo or Hong Kong and just walk down the streets and notice, all the activity, all the dynamism, all that stuff is going on. People walking around, going, maybe to their jobs, to buy something, to take out a loan, to whatever. That is all part of the economy. People that live somewhere, working together, ultimately in their own self-interest, and in the end, as it turns out, in the interest of the public good in general. That is what an economy is. It's the most elusive, in many ways, the most elusive system you can ever stumble upon, because the way politicians and people in power today like to think of it is, it's just a big sort of out of control thing that you have to somehow interfere with and fix. And unfortunately, it's the biggest fallacy in all of history. And the sooner this fallacy becomes obsolete and is never returned to or even mentioned again, the sooner the human condition will improve for all of mankind, I think. Because what essentially we're looking at here is that, if you watch the Hayek versus Keynes rap battle part 2, which I think is pretty cool, but it's also very educational and informative, and I think a lot of people should watch it. He mentions something about the economy isn't an engine. There's no it to fix. The economy is us. It's organic, and he couldn't be more right about it. Trying to control the economy, the way governments promise to do, the way governments say, we have to regulate the economy, we have to make sure everything is, stable and whatever. That very premise in itself is flawed, because an economy is the machinations of hundreds, thousands, millions, even billions of people cooperating with one another and exchanging goods and services. That's not something you can control. And the same way that, one man can't control a bunch of people, a bunch of cars driving in the streets. You can't. If you try to step in front of one of them, you'll get run over. This is, in some ways, it's the same thing. The only difference is instead of just it being you, you're putting, big steel barriers in the road. So you're blocking people from from driving, and sometimes they crash. I know it's kind of a simplistic way of looking at it, but it really, whenever you want, just anytime you try to think about the economy, think of it in terms of the fact that there is no it. There isn't an it to fix. There is not an it to regulate, to whatever. The economy is not a car that you can jumpstart and that sometimes run out of gas and that needs a refueling. The economy is like, it's like evolution. It's like organisms, evolving and progressing, and some of them make progress and some of them don't. It's an organic process, and the more a government tries to fuck with it, the more the more the machinations are distorted. Like the very idea, for instance, of regulating interest rates. That's one thing that the Fed can do, and that a central bank can do. Regulate interest rates. This is a flawed premise because it sends false signals throughout the economy. Anytime a government tries to impose some kind of regulation on a price or anything, it sends a false signal throughout the economy. So like, the fact that the Fed sets interest rates artificially low, for instance, gives the false signal throughout the economy that there's money available to borrow. Normally, interest rates in the market would be low, theoretically, if people are saving a lot. Which is not, they're doing the exact opposite right now. People are trying to, spend as much as they can. Of course, some people aren't. Some people are actually doing the right thing and saving their money. And the Fed, of course, can't have this because it has to try to stimulate growth. So it sets interest rates artificially even lower. I mean, they can't get any lower, essentially, the way it is right now, to try to stimulate, growth. Again, this sends false signals throughout the economy. The idea of economic growth. I can't stress the notion of savings more. People have to save money in order for there to be growth. There has to be money saved in banks, which businesses can then borrow, and banks can then loan out, in order for companies to start ventures and to hire people, and for those people to get paid for manufacturing goods and services. Those goods and services get put out into the marketplace, and then those people go out and spend some of their paycheck on those goods and services, and people benefit from the increased amount of products that they can purchase. Over time, those products become cheaper and more affordable. Living standards improve. That is what happens when you let the free market work. Of course, I've said this before. Socialists and anti-capitalists like Bill Burns too will have you believe that all that happens in if you set the market free is the Great Depression. Markets will just crash. They'll just crash somehow. And when that happens, we have to fix things. Markets will just crash magically. Why do markets crash? Why does an economy crash? How can it be such that seemingly every sector or industry, or a lot of them, somehow turn out bankrupt at the same time? What causes that coordination, of booms and busts? What causes that cycle? I'll tell you what causes it right now. It's the only thing that's ever caused recessions. It's either artificially low interest rates, or an inflation, an injection of currency into the money supply, or, as was the case throughout the 19th century, and a lot of people don't like to admit this when they talk about those panics, and what the causes were behind them. They'll take things like the Panic of 1893 and say, oh, there you go, you've got market failures in a free market. They'll assume, of course, that it was a free market because they don't know anything about what the government did to cause that. As it turns out, of course, that panic and the subsequent recession, which I mean was nothing compared to what happened in the Great Depression when the government really got involved, was because of the government trying to fix the ratio of gold to silver, because we had a bimetallic currency standard back then, gold and silver. So they tried to fix the ratio at something that wasn't the market level. Back then I think they set it at like 15 when the actual rate was like 15.5 at one point, or 16 to 1 or 15.5 to 1. In any case, it wasn't the real market ratio, so miners weren't taking whatever metal was being undercut to the mint. They were taking the one that was more profitable, i.e. the either silver or gold, depending on which one the ratio the government set ratio favored. So essentially, there was an explosion of silver or gold mining and minting, but neither one was minted based on market conditions. But that's a long story. Essentially, what happened was the market was distorted. And it just goes to say again that anytime you distort the market, it sends false signals throughout the economy. That's the most important lesson here. Prices are signals. The price of something is a signal of its economic condition, in an overall economy. It can signal scarcity. It can an increase in price can signal scarcity. It can signal abundance. It can signal all kinds of things. But the same applies for interest rates. Interest rates are an indication of how much money people are saving, how much money is being being put into banks, how much money is being saved, how much overall is available to spend. When interest rates are low, due to the market, not the government, of course, people take out loans more, usually to finance production. That's what we want, and I mean that's the only reason really to take out loans, is to finance production, which ultimately creates jobs and people get employed, and the cycle continues. If interest rates are high, that means people aren't saving very much. That means that they're spending a lot, and maybe there's an increase. They'll go out and spend that money. That money will create an increase in demand for products. So that's a signal for businesses to continue expanding. So when those people stop spending again and they run out of income to spend, and they buy the things that they want, and they put the rest of their money back in banks. That money is again loanable. The businesses can loan more easy and start more business ventures and expand and ultimately increase the amount of goods. That's how you create wealth. Wealth is and Peter Schiff just explains it so simply. It's such a simple thing to grasp. Wealth is created when more stuff is in circulation. The more stuff you have, the wealthier you are. So if, say, tomorrow, we were able to somehow magically put, everything in the world, that's been man-made or manufactured somehow, or built, if we could put all of it in a big duplicate machine and double, the amount of stuff in the world, we'd be doubly wealthy, because there'd be double the amount of things, double the amount of tangible assets, things that you can own, like food or clothing or jewelry or whatever. That is production. That is an increase in wealth. By contrast, if we double the amount of money in circulation, i.e. print money, which is what the Fed does, we would not be doubly wealthy. We would simply have double the amount of claims in dollars or whatever currency you're talking about to the same amount of stuff. That's why there's inflation, is because prices increase overall in an economy because there is an increased flow of claims to the same number of stuff. So all of a sudden it takes more claims, i.e. dollars, to get those things. It's a simple result of, the market. The law of supply and demand applies for currencies in the same way that it does for goods and services. If there's a gold rush and somebody mines a lot of gold, all of a sudden there's going to be more gold in circulation. The price of gold ought to drop. The same thing happens for currencies. If you print money, the amount of money in circulation increases. The price of the value of the money goes down. The price of each dollar, in terms of something else, in terms of everything, in terms of a loaf of bread, in terms of a pair of sneakers, in terms of a car, it all increases. So inflation is and always has been a monetary phenomenon. I can't really explain in words how important that concept is. Because, when a government has control over a currency, the only thing it can change is how expensive things are. That's all that can happen. It can't regulate an economy. A government can't fix an economy. There's no it to fix. That's why the entire occupation, the entire business of being an economist arose out of the Great Depression, because an economic collapse, which for some reason we seem to assume resulted out of the free market, which it didn't, of course. It resulted out of government spending in and of itself, and artificially low interest rates in the works. So that's a different question. But the fact that there was a Great Depression, and that the government suddenly decided to start getting involved and trying to fix it, that is what pretty much created demand for economists. We suddenly got the idea that maybe we can do something to fix an economy. Maybe we can do something to boost it somehow. The notion came that you can just fix an economy like you can fix a car. So economists started showing up, and they all started having, different schools of thought. Keynes showed up and said, hey, you know what, you can fix it. Here's what you do, A, B, C. And his book, of course, the politicians liked his book because, it basically put the government in power and said, hey, the government's got to step in and do whatever. So it's good publicity for politicians. They can act like they're doing something, and people can applaud them for promising that they're going to do something. But it's very obscure, because when you try to fuck with an economy, it's like nothing else. You can screw with you can mess with things like gay rights or women's rights or something, and the effects are visible, obviously. Not giving women the right to vote will get them to be pissed. Same with not giving LGBTQ rights to do whatever they want will make them pissed. But when you fuck with an economy, the effects, the results are obscure. Nobody really knows why something happens. It's just there. So when an economy is screwed up, people obviously want something to be done. But they don't take time to address why it got that way. That's why Hayek says the bust, isn't what should make you feel leery. It's the boom that's important. Why is there a boom? Why is everyone going up and everyone going down? Like a synchronized cycle. There's no cycle. That cycle is caused by the government setting artificially low interest rates, which drives speculative bubbles in certain, industries. Whatever's the trend. Whether it's, automobiles like it or like it was in the 20s, or real estate like it was recently. There's always some kind of trendy speculative investment. Pyramid schemes get started, and people basically start just throwing their money into things, because it's easy to get a hold of them. Banks are the first ones to get the money from the Federal Reserve, and then they distribute it to investors. They all start big investment schemes, which aren't based on production. I mean, if those schemes were based on production of things that are in demand because of people having disposable income the way it's supposed to be in an economy, then you would have actual economic growth. But there would still be inflation because you're adding money to the money supply. So, I mean, what this whole stimulus thing does essentially is cause the booms and busts. Yeah, there's a good part. There's a high time in which mostly rich people make a lot of money off of, pyramid schemes and all kinds of collective, investments. Most of which turn out bust in the end because they're not profitable. It's just a scheme. That's what a pyramid scheme is. It's an unsustainable way to try to get more and more people in on the money train so that they can all make money. It doesn't work, And the market, when you look at the stock indexes, that's not going to conceal it, because some companies or ETFs will go up and down based on that pyramid scheme idea, but some will go up and down based on actual consumer demand and underlying, economic conditions. So there's a big question of transparency, and how much is really based on sound market principles. That's why people look at the economy these days and they're like, what the hell am I looking at? What is all this? Why does it have to be so complex? It doesn't. We make it complex because of these booms and busts. It's such a revelation to think of the economy as an organic system. The moment you can do that and see past this whole facade of complicated just crap that gets spewed out, because of all of this stimulus and spending that subsequently drives these private sector responses to it. All of those complex, stock market, all those complex stock market transactions and investment vehicles and all that shit, that jungle of just unfathomable investment transactions is all part of the big pyramid scheme of investment, which is basically the private sector's reaction to easy money. They're trying to find more ways to combine, leverage with investment and somehow churn out a profit, based on appreciation and depreciation of assets. So it's complex, and even I'm not a professional investor. I don't get all of this stuff, but what I do understand is why it shows up, and it shows up because of easy credit. That is the cause of the boom and bust cycle. Look back at the 19th century, and you'll never see any of this, ridiculous stock market bullshit based on, margin loans and fractional reserves and, speculative investment and all that. People won't speculate in a free economy. Some might, but it's very risky. They'll restrain themselves, because putting your money on the line for something that might work and might not is something that a businessman with a sensible mind isn't going to do. That's why you see so much more of it, as a result of these government stimuli and setting interest rates artificially low. I can't explain how important that is, how important a factor that is in causing these booms and busts. When you set interest rates low, that gives markets a false signal of availability of credit. So they'll start borrowing, and guess what? When that money comes back to roost and you've got to repay those debts and you haven't churned out a profit, that's what we call a credit crunch. You can't find the money to finance your debts, so you turn to the government to spew out more, and it's like an endless cycle. It just makes so much sense to me. I wish I could convey this mindset to people, just directly. This explains, why Peter Schiff and Ron Paul, when they're talking, they have so much to say. It's because there's so much to understand. There's so much to understand and so much bullshit to see through, and just see past all of it when you look at the way an economy works. And I mean, in a way, it's psychologically intimidating. There's so much information anyway. All these stock numbers going up and down, and nobody knows what's what, who's doing what. It's when really all of it is really supposed to reflect market conditions, things that are going on outside. Farmers somewhere in Iowa, reporting their harvest, and whether or not it's a good harvest or a bad harvest will determine wheat prices, or corn prices, or just things like that. That's what determines, or what ought to determine, these stock prices and things like that. When the government fucks with them, that's what creates uncertainty. That's why investors panic, because they don't know what's going to happen. They get reports, of what's going on, but then, what's the government going to do? Are they going to set interest rates high or low? People panic. They don't want to spend their money. That's the market trying to react to uncertainty that government creates through manipulation of the currency and the money supply. It's never made more sense to me before, and I really, really want to convey this. Please, people, please listen to me. Even if you've never listened, even taken an interest in economics before, this ultimately impacts everyone, because it's what determines how much things are going to cost, whether or not you'll be able to take out that loan, for whatever you need, whether or not, ultimately, the human condition will improve, whether living standards will improve or not. This is at the heart of all of it. So please, just listen to what I have to say and consider it, and try to evaluate it and put it in perspective. I try my best, but everyone kind of has to process this stuff in their own way, and it might not be as easy for some people. But just think about it. It's food for thought, and let me know what you think. Cheers.